Here we go. What is the definition of sin? By Lachlan McElroy. What is sin? Some say that sin is something which God has deemed to be bad, but I believe that God deems something bad because it's sin. Then what is it? That's something I've been looking into a lot, and in this essay I'll be showing you my thought processes and the conclusions I have come to. Part 1. Disobedience. I have asked. I think most people would say that a sin is an act that breaks one of the 10 commandments, but that's clearly not right. There's still a bit before the 10 commandments had been given. For example, the story of Cain and Abel happened before the 10 commandments were given. At this point, I imagine that people would make a slight adjustment to their view and say that sin is disobedience to God. I think that's closer to the truth, but still not right. If sin was just disobedience, and God could easily eliminate sin by simply not giving us any commands. What's that, you say? Then we would be able to do any wicked thing we wanted and not realize what is wrong. Well, in that case, don't you think that the wicked thing itself would be the sin? Besides, there's a Bible verse that clearly says it's still sin without any commandments. Oh, do I have to do the quote? Yes, people sinned even before the law was given, but it's not counted as sin because there was not yet law to break. Still, everyone died from the time of Moses, even those who did not disobey an explicit commandment of God as Adam did now. Now Adam is a symbol of representation of Christ who is yet to come. Romans 5:13-14 NLT. Many say that God made us so he could share his love, and it's not real love if it's forced. You need free will in order to love. They also say we can sin because we have free will. Assuming that's true, then that also means we can be disobedient because we have free will. If sin has disobedience, then what would mean the only way to get rid of sin would be to be forced obedience? Getting rid of our free will and getting rid of love. That doesn't sound right to me. We can just turn up to heaven and lose our free will to maintain the zero sin policy. Without our free will, we would also lose our love. As I understand it, love is God's only reason and motivation for creating us. It's impossible for God to be greedy. It's impossible for God to be greedy. He has or can have absolutely anything he wants. God's not motivated by personal gain. He has nothing to gain. Think about it. What other reason would there be for creating us other than love? God does everything out of love. He can't do anything for God. We can't improve his life. Love is the absolute backbone of everything. Without love, God wouldn't have had any reason for making us. If we were to lose our free will and therefore love, God would be contradicting himself. And this is my evidence of why sin isn't simply a disobedience. Though it should be noted, I'm not saying disobedience isn't a sin. I'm just saying that it's not what defines a sin. Part 2. Origins of the word sin. Dun, 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 dun. Excuse me. It would be kind of stupid to investigate the meaning of sin without looking into the original Hebrew and Greek words used for the sin. So that's what I'm gonna do now. Disclaimer, I'm no Hebrew or Greek language expert. I found the following definitions from Hebrew and Greek lexicons. Yes. I've counted 20 different words throughout the Bible for a sin. So some of them are more to do with transgression, breaking law, and some are variations of the same word. Even with excluding those words, I still count around 13 words which translate into sin. The main Hebrew root word for sin is chata, which means to sin, miss the way, go wrong, incur guilt, forfeit, purify from uncleanliness. I say root because there are a lot of Hebrew words for sin, but most of them originate from chata. Another popular word for sin is pesha, which means rebellion or transgression, the breaking of the law. The main Greek word for sin is hamartontano, which means to miss the mark, do wrong, sin. Side note, a lot of the time, the definitions of these Hebrew words, Greek words, in the lexicons are simply sin, which doesn't really help me. This is really bad. Oh, no, I have to do this stupid fucking quote. The first time sin is mentioned in the Bible is in Genesis 4:7. In the story of Cain and Abel, then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you was that right, will you not be accepted? But if you do, then it was right sin crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must overrule it." Genesis 4:6-7. The word used for sin is Genesis 4:7 is chatata, which originates from chata. Its definition according to lexicon is simply sin. What's a sin though? There's one last thing I would talk about in this section. We translate the words chata and homarato into English word sin. The sin in the English word, we only ever see sin in the context of the Bible or the other religious writings. Where did the word sin originate from? Well, the modern word sin comes from the Middle English word shin, sinny, which comes from the Old English sin. From there is not certain, but probably came from the Germanic root sunta, or the Latin word sons, both of which have really been guilty. Oh man, we still got a lot. Holy shit. Part 3. What is good and what is bad? What are good and bad? What defines them? I think bad and sin are very closely related, so let's look into this. According to the dictionary, good is an adjective which means being positive or desirable in nature, not good or poor. Bad is also an adjective which means not achieving an inadequate standard, poor or moral evil. Now before I move on, I had to give C.S. Lewis credit. Some of the following are the concepts I learned from the Bare Book of Christianity. If you want to further look into the subject of good and bad, I highly suggest you read it. Bad can't exist without good. It's impossible. They're simply different ends in the same scale. What? Like how a line can't have a left end without a right end. You could have a line which goes on for infinity, but then it would have no ends at all. You can have the death without life first. You can't get sick without feeling well first. You can't lose something without the first having it. If life doesn't exist, then it would have no meaning. In my opinion, bad can be coined as being one of two following. Something on the opposite side of the scale to good, of the absence of something good. This has become more of me reading it than actually rapping it. Another thing I'd like you to note, also experienced by C.S. Lewis in his book, is that you can be good for the sake of goodness, but you can't be bad for the sake of being bad. So that was the product you wanted. You can earn money by the product the good way, or you can steal the product you want the bad way. Even in the bad way, you did it for something good. The product. What am I doing? Every bad thing you do for something good. Nobody is bad just to be bad. Even people who are purposely cruel are cruel either for getting something they want or something because they know the prevention which gives them pleasure being a good thing and then being cruel. Blah, 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 blah. The following concepts are my own, but still built on the concepts explained by Mr. Lewis. Oh, this is 9 minutes long, bro. Holy shit. Make sure you add this in the song, Jimatron. Moving to the new example, which pictures say I was going to invent a new shape called a quadruple. Not to be confused with the quadruple. Now try drawing a bad quadruple. You can't. I haven't even invented it yet. The bad something can't exist before the first one, which is the good one. When I saw the first one, I'll be creating the standard by which all future attempts at the drawing a quadruple would be judged. The good quadruple and the standard for good quadruple. What the fuck is a quadruple? Steadily the standard, and the standard being set by the one and the good. quadruple question mark with a weird quadruple. If I was to try drawing another quadruple, it would be judged / compared to the first one, the standard. Since the first one is the standard, it is good. Oh wow, that's a really bad quadruple. I believe that all good things are good because they meet a standard. Then why, when you say life is good, I think it's good because it meets your standard. But what's a good life you would like? When you say you've had a bad day, it's because the particular day falls short of the standard for a good day. Some might say that they call something good just because it's helpful or enjoyable. I think being helpful or enjoyable doesn't rule out availability. Rather, I think it's the reason I meet the standard. Sometimes the standard might not be in the concrete. It can rise or fall. For example, a computer made back in the 1990s might have considered good back then, as computers not more powerful. The standard for a good computer rose. A computer made back in the 1990s would not be considered good in terms of how powerful it is today. In conclusion, good is good because it meets a standard, and the standard is usually determined by the good something. Bad is something which falls short on the standard. Part 4, Sin Standards. Excuse me. Just gonna drink a little bit of water. Been singing for like 11 minutes. Part 4, Sin and Standards. Why would God care about sin? It must affect him in some way, whether directly or indirectly, or else he wouldn't care about it. I very much doubt sin affects God directly. Rather, I believe God is affected by sin due to the love for us. Sin affects us in a negative way, and God loves us and hates to see the effects of sin has on us. Sin affects God because sin affects God because the effect sin has on us. I've formulated this concept of what I think sin is. After consideration, I've changed it quite a bit from what I originally came up with, but for the sake of psychological journey it offers, I'll start from what I originally produced and show the amendments I have made over time. So here is where I started off. I've drawn out into a diagram to help me explain it. Knowledge equals God and love and compassion. God's will equals God's law and transgression. Sin equals hate and self-negation. Fuck, I got a foot cramp. No, God. Knowledge equals God's will and compassion. Love equals God's will and God's law. Contradiction, transgression, sin, hate, self-negation, ignorance. Inverse. Contradiction. Now allow me to walk you through it. We start off with God, and from God we have this perfect and unfailing love for us. Out of love comes compassion, charity, and all those other subdivisions of love. For the purpose of simplicity, I only put down my compassion. Because of this love for us, he only wants the best for us. And out of his love comes his will. What he does and doesn't want for us. The law simply reflects what he does and doesn't want for us. Backing back up to God now comes knowledge. As I explained back in the part 3, you can't have good without bad. In this diagram, we had the opposite inverse of knowledge, compassion, and love with the ignorance and selfishness and hate. Because of these opposites of goods, we are capable of bad. These opposites are the basis of sin, which defined by this diagram is something which contradicts or clashes with God's will. Then I also added transgression and the law of this for the sake of making this diagram more complete. I believe these opposites of love can be grouped into what is called iniquity. This concept as sin being a contradiction of God's will is also a standard, which sin as being anything which falls short of the standard of what God wants to happen. I'm not sure if God's will is the standard or a standard being a consequence of his will. I don't think it matters that much. There's a problem with this definition. If sin is just something against God's will, then death is a sin. We'll agree that murder is a sin, but none of us say that dying in a car crash is a sin. Yet dying in a car crash is against God's will. So is death a sin? According to definition, I've just said it out, it is. This really doesn't sound right, so after some thinking, I have concluded that it would be better if we change this definition of sin we have to be an addiction, an action which causes circumstances which are against God's will. Note, the above paragraphs assume that you and I agree that God doesn't will bad things to happen. Yup. Though the definition makes sense to me, it doesn't explain why sin has the consequences it does. By consequences, I'm referring to how it brought death into the world, and how sacrifices could die in our place. The simple definition that says sin is disobedience doesn't explain it either. So I don't think this has any weaknesses in my definition. After I formulated this, I started to wonder, is this diagram I've drawn out simply shows why God hates sin and not what it defines it? Part 5. God's nature and the missing mark. I started to realize there's another component to this puzzle, God's nature. When we sin, we not only go against God's will, but we also go against His nature. This nature will originally installed in us when we were created. Excuse me. I realized that God's will might not be the defining factor. In the diagram I drew, God's will could easily be replaced with God's nature, and the diagram would make still perfect sense to me. Or just perfect sense. Which is it? Thinking about it nearly produces a paradox. You can't go against God's nature without going against His will. You can't go against God without You can't go against God's will without going against His nature. Then I realized something. All the elements which fuel sin are inverses of love. Love is one of the main characteristics of God's nature. If sin's defining factor was to being against God's nature, it would help to explain some of the catastrophic effects it has. Because when we sin, we go against every good nature that God instilled in us. When you look at this like that, I can really see why God sees sin as an abomination. Perhaps God's nature is the defining factor in sin, and which allows us God to against it. Now for the missing mark. If we were to look back at part 2, if we go back to part 2, it says the origins of the word sin. Look at the definition of the original word of sin. You may have noticed the common theme of the missing the mark and to go wrong. From there, many people have said that sin means to miss the mark. If we look at the mark as being God's nature, then I would say that more or less fits the definition that we have established, with sin being defined as going wrong of God's nature, or to miss the standard that God's nature sets for us. Perhaps it would be more accurate to say that sin causes us to miss the mark, not sin is missing the mark. If sin was an act of missing the mark, then murder wouldn't be a sin, rather it would be the cause of the sin. Because the murder would fall short of the standard, causing us to miss the mark. A lot of people would say that sin is missing the mark, say that mark is the God's glory, holiness, a Bible verse in the support of the Romans 3:23. For all have sinned and all fall short of the glory of God. Conclusion. Now for the conclusion, what is a sin? We could theorize that sin is activity. That sin is activity that contradicts our original God-created nature. That shifts the focus off from God, meaning that God is no longer the defining point. But when the definition of sin is actively that contradicts God's nature, the defining point is God and not something which God created. That makes logical sense to me. In conclusion, I believe that sin is an activity performed by us which contradicts the nature of God. And I fucking finished that shit in under 20 minutes. This is bullshit. I'm done.